Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board, and tonight I am once again at my computer, not at the drawing board. I'm here to take a look at Earthbound Between Two Earths by Narwhal. This is an interesting project that I backed last year. It's finally out. I got the digital copy because I'm a cheapskate, and I've read through it twice. I've let it settle in my brain a bit, and now I'm ready to talk about it. So what do we have here? Well, this is a pretty straightforward sci-fi story. It's about three humans who come to Earth from parts unknown in the greater cosmos. It's a little unclear right now why there are humans out in the greater cosmos, but there you go. Of course, it's possible that Julia and Spaceman are just aliens that look very human, but I don't think that's what it is. I think they are actually human. So uh, they're sent to Earth by a alien faction or person by that goes by the name the 13th sponsor. The 13th sponsor is putting together fighters to enter a blood sport event called the Grand Prix, and he's he or she or it are trying to recruit four fugitives from Earth for their Grand Prix team. Those four fugitives are the name is Lebanon. It's like the Sisters of Sirens of Violence, something like that. Um, they are actually not in this story a whole lot, although they are um, important later on. Uh, we don't actually see a whole lot of what they're capable of yet. This is part one of two. I'm going to talk more about that later, though. So let's talk about the story we do have. In addition to Julia and Spaceman, there is a third member of their group, their team, their loose association of people who have been enslaved by the 13th sponsor. I don't know exactly what to call them. But WizKid knows Julia and Spaceman, but he was stranded on Earth 3 years before this story takes place. Spaceman and Julia have been in cryo sleep since then, apparently, and WizKid has been stuck on Earth and hoping to get back into space for whatever reason. Not entirely clear on that part because WizKid seems to have a better life on Earth than he did in space. But we'll again talk more about that in a minute. Um, so the interesting catch is that Spaceman and Julia have been given experimental weapons called R types, which you can see here. And when people are shot with these guns, they don't really get hurt. The gun just sort of hijacks their free will and makes them obedient to the gun's owner. And so they have to shoot four fugitives with these and bring them back to the 13th sponsor. And WizKid is kind of a bonus tiebreaker. Um, so that's the basic plot, and pretty much everything that happens in the story revolves around that objective. There's a small sub theme about a high school age reporter on Earth who's trying to figure out what all these alien stories he's been collecting are about, but I don't know if that's going anywhere or not. Doesn't seem terribly important to the main conflict. We'll see. Again, part one of two. So the story is pretty interesting. It's fun. It definitely moves at a really good pace. It sucks you in, and it just runs with things. Um, as protagonists, the main three, Spaceman, Julia, and WizKid, they exist at on different levels. WizKid is the one I understand the most. He knows a bunch of people on Earth. They talk to him and they talk about him, and you learn a lot about him through those conversations. Spaceman is very simple. He's very straightforward, and again, Julia talks about him and he talks with him. So again, he doesn't seem as complex. He's a very blunt, straightforward, simple-minded man. There's nothing wrong with that. So he's a very good character, and I understand him. Julia, I don't understand quite as well. She takes a very subtle approach to the job she's given, unlike Spaceman, who is very blunt and straightforward. She takes a scientific approach, but she doesn't seem really the only person she has to talk to for most of the story is Spaceman, and he's again he's a simple, straightforward man, so he doesn't do very well illuminating her character, what she's all about. He does talk some with WizKid, but WizKid is very wary of her, rightly so. Um, and so again, he is not very interested in her as a person, especially because he seems to already understand her. They did know each other in the past, so it really is kind of a question mark. Hoping that changes in part two because we didn't get to know that much about her. Plot wise, again, I really like the story. I like what they do with the R types. Spaceman and Julia use them in very different ways that are interesting to look at and think about, and the kind of situations they present. And even up to the very end of this book, new wrinkles are creeping up in R types and how they're used. They are do not, however, turn into little spaceships that kind of zoom back and forth on the bottom of the screen and shoot. So they're not that kind of an R type, unfortunately. Likewise, although the title of this comic is Earthbound, Mr. Saturn does not appear. And I'm sure we're all disappointed by that. But beyond that, it's a very good story. It's a satisfying story. It's a fun story. Art wise, let's talk a little bit about the art because it is a comic. The art is rather simplistic. It will probably remind you of uh, the kind of style you would see in animation. It's a little looser. It's very flowing. The line work is all about making the shape, and then all of the definition um, comes from coloring and shading. Again, I like it. Um, it's very simple, but it's easy to understand, and without a lot of the extra detail, I think it actually has a little clarity than some of the comic art I've seen. So I like it. It's probably not going to be for everyone. It is a very loose style, very sketchy style, and that's not going to appeal to everyone. Um, the use of angles and composition, I think, is really great. This page here, I really like. I like the way it gives a sense of how big the situation Julia and Spaceman are caught up in is, how insignificant they are in it, and of course, it's just a very dynamic shot. Well, um, there are a couple of things about the art that I think could use improvement. I'm not a huge fan of the color palettes on some pages. There's a lot of pastels and neons. It can be a little garish at times, um, but on the whole, it's not bad. Um, the line work is a little too loose. Um, you know, this this guy's robe here, the lines they either need to, I think, be a little smoother, especially at a place like this where it looks like he's got a ruler up his sleeve, um, or you need different. You need variation in thickness. So, like in this shot here, really thick lines around the outside, at least, of your two characters in the foreground will help differentiate them from all guys in the background. As it is, if it wasn't for these perspective lines here, it would look like we have three miniatures squeezed in between these two people, which is clearly not the case. So just a few minor things that I think would make the art um, sharper, more impactful, with a little more clarity. Um, but all in all, I like it, um, and I hope to that it will just continue to improve. Storytelling wise, I do like uh, the approach to the situation. Um, Spaceman and Julia don't spend a whole lot of time angsting about their situation or how they are effectively slaves or talking about how much they want freedom from their situation. Um, I mean, all those things are probably going to be true of characters in their situation, but spending too much time on it drags the story down, and Narwhal avoids that completely. I also like the different approaches Spaceman and Julia take. Spaceman is very blunt and direct, builds an army. Julia is very analytical. She's strategic. She uses her R-type as a scalpel rather than a hammer. Um, and I even like that she doesn't shoot WizKid with it, so she has sort of a control group, something to compare unmodified behavior to the modified behavior of the people she's working with, so she can get a more complete picture of what she's working with when she shoots people with the R-type. So that's all a lot of fun. It's very interesting. And of course, WizKid does not have an R-type, and he's stuck in the middle of all this, trying to work some stuff out and trying to get away without being caught up in the Grand Prix himself. So he does a lot of interesting things there, trying to figure out Julia and the people around him. So that's good. I don't think the story has any major negatives. I would have liked a little more exposition in some places. This is one of them right here, actually. When Spaceman and Julia first get the R types, they aren't glowing. And at first, I assumed this was because they were like genetically coded to these two or something like that. But then Spaceman gives his R type to other people who he's already taken over, and they use it just fine. He doesn't need to hang on to the R type to keep them under his control. They can shoot it without him having to authorize it. So I don't understand why they had to swap guns and why they started glowing at this point. Possibly it ties back to these two AI. And once they're tied to Spaceman and Julia, then they can operate the gun at it. I I don't I don't understand this bit. I don't understand quite what it means, if anything, for the story as a whole. Hopefully, we will see more about that in if it's important. If it's not important, I don't know why this bit was here. I mean, it could have been a gag, but it doesn't funny. It bugs me because it seems like it's important, and I can't parse why. Um, and again, the fact that there is a sequel coming that finishes this story, a direct sequel, may explain all that. It definitely bugged me as I was reading this. All in all, it's not a bad story. It's a pretty good story. Um, I don't know if it counts as a great story, but it certainly entertained me. And for the cost of a digital copy, it was certainly worthwhile. I probably would have. I don't know if I'm going to back for a physical copy, but that's more because of my budget than anything else, to be perfectly. Which brings me to another important thing to note. Um, if the idea of people dueling with free will it appeals to you, there is a second Indiegogo open for this, which I will link in the description down below. You can download, you can purchase physical copies, and I think you can get the PDF for download as well, if that's what you want to do. So if you hadn't heard of this project until just now, don't worry, you haven't missed out. So, Earthbound Between Two Earths. Very interesting story. Lots of high concept stuff going on in here. Very good first effort from Narwhal, and I'm looking forward to the sequel. Hope you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, there's a like and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.